Let's talk about UCSD, so I just want to give props to the
Did
Tritons.
you know that 80% of Americans are vitamin D deficient? Vitamin D has gotten a tremendous amount of attention in recent years, with research indicating both the risks of vitamin D deficiency as well as the benefits of vitamin D in your body. This includes a direct link between optimal vitamin D levels and reduced cancer risk. Your best source of vitamin D is the sun. The body generates vitamin D from the sun's UVB rays, which only enter the atmosphere when the sun is at an elevation angle from the horizon of greater than 35 degrees. This means that you can only get vitamin D in the middle of the day, even in the sunniest of places. As the sun climbs, the rate of vitamin D generation goes up until it reaches the top position, called solar noon. This is the time of maximum UVB rays and hence maximum vitamin D generation. Once the sun reaches the 35-degree line again in the afternoon, UVB rays stop entering the atmosphere. It's important to note that the sun's UVA rays continue entering the atmosphere and can damage the skin. So people who think getting sun outside the middle of the day is a good idea are actually missing the chance to get vitamin D, yet still risk damaging their skin.
So I have so many people that say, I go in the sun, but they don't necessarily go at the right time. They don't show the right, they have leathery skin and all of that. And so to me, we've all seen sunlight. We all kind of think we know it, but very impressive in terms of there's only a certain time you can get it. It changes depending on the time of the year and where you're at in terms of the latitude for us. So for me, I just find this very helpful. So we call it vitamin D, but it's not really a vitamin. Vitamins are only if you can't get it any other way except like taking a supplement, like we have like vitamin C, and there's certain foods that have that stuff. But you don't need vitamin D either, because there's not very many foods that have vitamin D. A couple of like really oily fish, that's how the Eskimos kind of got it, so because they never see the sun too much. But it's not really in any foods. You can sometimes get a little bit, that's why they fortified milk and things. But it's really something you should get from the sun. And the usual amount you want in your body is about 60. That's the level. That's sort of optimal. It goes from like 30 to 100. Very rare to have toxicity, and you only get toxicity if you take it as a supplement. And the way they did this, they actually did blood tests from all these Aboriginal tribes that were out in the sun all the time and kind of did that. So I like to measure vitamin D because it gives me an idea. It's like the canary in the coal mine idea, like how's the person's light environment. Interestingly, vitamin D is the precursor for testosterone and most of the other major hormones. So if you're low in testosterone for the guys, that's one way to bump up your testosterone, is to improve either your light environment and or the amount of vitamin D you get. So, and every cell has a vitamin D receptor. It's amazing. If you want to just Google vitamin D, and especially this guy Ivor Cummings, it's amazing. If you learn about vitamin D as like sort of your vitamin of the month, it really bodes well, because it does, vitamin D, the main thing we hear about is to help us absorb calcium. So I have so many, like today, I have a young athletic female who had a bad injury, very low in vitamin D. She happens to be vegan, so now she's low in iron, low in protein, and so those are the challenges we have to try to figure out, because she has a lot of nutritional requirements, of which her vitamin D was very low too. So this is where you have to kind of supplement. So I'll finish this out real quick.
In addition to the solar angle, your location determines the times that you can get vitamin D from the sun. If you live in a city that's at 35 degrees latitude or less from the equator, you can get vitamin D every day of the year because the sun is always at least 35 degrees off the horizon. If you are farther away from the equator, you can only get vitamin D for part of the year. D-Minder computes your solar position, and if you are in a place where you cannot get vitamin D year-round, it will figure out when your next opportunity will be, whether it's hours, days, weeks, or months away. Furthermore, altitude of your location also affects vitamin D generation. For every 1,000 feet of elevation, vitamin D generation increases by 11%. Another factor that determines the rate of vitamin D generation is the amount of clothing you are wearing. The more surface area of skin that is exposed, the higher your rate of vitamin D generation. Your body type also determines the rate of vitamin D generation. Pigment is the skin's defense against burns. The darker your skin, the less vitamin D you will generate. The lightest skin pigment generates 6 times more vitamin D than the darkest skin pigment. As you gain weight, your body's ability to generate and use vitamin D declines because the vitamin is held in fat stores. Furthermore, as your body ages, it takes much longer to generate vitamin D. By the time you turn 50, it takes twice as long to create the same amount of vitamin D. D-Minder takes all of these factors into account when it tracks your vitamin D generation. After a brief survey of your body type, it gets your latitude, longitude, and altitude, and looks up the UV index where you are. It then computes the actual position of the sun based on the time of day and shows it in the main panel. When you are ready to add a sun exposure, simply click the button and start the stopwatch. Select the amount of your body that is exposed using the chart below as a guide. Then start the timer and track the amount of vitamin D that your body is generating. D-Minder will warn you when you're about to burn. Click the turnover button when you're going to roll over and the burn counter will restart. When you are done, tap on Stop and Save. If you forget to stop the timer, you can easily edit the end time later. D-Minder tracks all of your sun exposures and displays the results visually so that you can monitor your daily, weekly, and monthly goals for vitamin D intake. To summarize, D-Minder allows you to track vitamin D from the sun so that you maximize your body's vitamin D generation while preventing burns. It provides you with the optimal time of day to lay in the sun, as well as forecasts to show the best days of the week for vitamin D generation. So go outside, take a walk, and start enjoying the benefits of vitamin D.
So, to me, it's really helped me to kind of quantify sort of what I'm doing. And so one of my challenges is that I work indoors. I have an indoor existence. And so there's a lot of clothing to protect you from the sun, but if you don't mind, I'll pass this around. So this is a vitamin D shirt I wear at lunchtime when I do get outside. So you can actually wear this so that you can get vitamin D, because it's not good for me to walk around the hospital without my shirt on. Little children, it would just not be good. And so, so I think these are all the kind of workarounds you can do. So I just go out to my car, I put that on, I walk around. No one knows any difference. It's just basically a very light shirt, but you can get some vitamin D that way, and then I don't necessarily have to take it as a supplement. So I do like to protect, our faces get way too much sun, so the best thing is to show what your solar panel, which is sort of your upper body, and it turns out that most of the UVA skin cancers are the squamous cell and basal cell, which I'm not saying are great, but no one really dies of those, and basically they're a little bit of a, and I don't want to minimize it, but they're a little bit more of a cosmetic thing. The one that's the worst is melanoma, especially in guys, and that's higher with indoor workers than outdoor workers. So again, you have to understand that there's a lot of different things with the dermatologist, the ophthalmologist, but when you really look at some of this, and where this really got to be a problem was in the Industrial Revolution, where there was so much smog, people couldn't get into the sun, and especially that's how they came with C-sections. The women had such bad bones that they had to deliver them by C-section because their pelvises were breaking. So the history of it's quite interesting, and I'm definitely not saying you should overdo the sun. I would like to Goldilocks it. Like I said, not too much, not too little, but understand that we're designed to get some sunlight, and there are ways to work around. I only need about 10-15 minutes at lunchtime to get vitamin D for the day, and that's a nice workaround that the shirts are relatively inexpensive.
You said 10 to 15 minutes for your daily.
That's a typical thing for me, if I wear a shirt like that. So anyway, if you, yeah, go ahead, question.
Does your body know it? Because I know I'm not outside enough. Does my body know if I take a supplement as opposed to getting it from the actual sun?
So that's very controversial, and I'm going to show you a guy that's has a lot of opinions on that. So in general, the supplement works well. It doesn't work great. It works well. There's a lot to be said about nature and evolution and what we're designed for, because there's a lot of other things you get from the sun besides the vitamin D. So if you're not getting vitamin D and you take it, there's a bunch of other stuff you're not getting, which means you're at risk. And one of the biggest things is the infrared light actually is quite helpful for your bones. So that's another thing that's very interesting. Plus, you release something called nitrous oxide, which is actually quite helpful. So anyway, my thing is the vitamin D is a workaround. I don't think it's optimal. Interestingly, you can overdose on the supplement, you can't overdose on the sun. Your body knows to stop that. So very exciting with that, and I think if you just want one little hobby, keep learning about vitamin D. Get yours checked every so often, just so you know, and try to get it above 60. Yes, ma'am?
Does sunblock, like if you put a sunblock on?
Yeah, that is,
Does that
yeah,
block
that basically, mainly, a lot of them, first off, there's a lot of toxicity to sunblocks, if you read about folks. It does preferentially sort of block UVB and not UVA, so your vitamin D goes way, way down. And it's very sort of inefficient as to how it blocks the sun. And in fact, there's more skin cancers since the advent of sunblock because people think, oh, I can stay in the sun longer. And so, to me, I try not to use any sunscreens, but rather clothing. So if you're gonna protect yourself, and then just kind of learn those sort of setups. But to me, because of, especially reading all the stuff on cancer, I'm sort of anti-sunscreens. I still want sun protection, but I'd rather do that through clothing than with the sunscreen.
So what do you do with the kids that are at the beach all the time?
Well, the same kind of stuff. I mean, you try to get them, you can get them a lot of the clothing kind of stuff, and you can get them hats and those sort of things. And if you have to, you can use the sunscreen, but then you're using minimal amounts. I mean, to me, those are the things we just have to work around to minimize that, and I would just try to learn all the different things. There are some less toxic sunscreens that you can look at, like mud. No, I'm joking, but you could use a lot of other stuff. But you're right, you have to be very careful. And it actually, interestingly, we may get into this a little bit, it actually really depends on where your mom comes from. We'll talk about mitochondria and stuff. Very fun stuff. So we talked about D-Minder. It's free, it's amazing, it's pretty wild. And at the very least, you can sort of science up. So if you only have a little time to be in the sun, then this is a good way to do it. So I try to get sun in the morning, at least a little bit, to try to set my eye clock for the sleep and all of that, and then try to get it at lunchtime, and then protect my eyes 3 hours before I fall asleep. So, so now I'm going to introduce you to like one of my idols, and this guy literally and figuratively can split your brain open. He's a neurosurgeon. He doesn't suffer fools well, so he's pretty. He's amazing. His blogs are just about unreadable because he's so smart. But he is the sort of person leading the push for quantum medicine. So you've heard of chemistry and you've heard of biology, which are most of the time that we see. You've heard of some physics, which is like energy and mass and force and all that. He's more at the electron level. And it's light, water, electromagnetism. That's why I put these in here. So your light environment is actually more important, he thinks, than even your food. So let me just show you a little bit of him. And I do apologize in advance, but he's pretty fun. He does a series of talks out of Vermont. And I've listened to this talk 10 times, and I've probably gotten probably 10% of it. My talk is kind of based on this, but I think it's worth at least learning a little bit about him, and he's pretty upset with what we're doing in terms of medicine, because most of us doctors don't get this. Sorry, I didn't realize it was still running. But I'll just give you a snippet of this. So he was really, really overweight, and he lost all his weight without exercise, and really without dieting. It really had to do with his light environment. And he's a neurosurgeon, so he didn't really change a lot of stuff. Sorry. So,
It's a bacteria that
sorry, they switched the whole thing. So, one second.
very few people in this room believe what's up there. Does obesity begin in the eye? I'm going to tell you, when I'm done with you, you're going to see a different perspective than you've ever seen before. Because I'm going to tell you the answer is yes. And how I got pretty famous on the internet is by writing something called a leptin prescription. When you go read it, you'll never see the word light in it. It just gives you 6 steps to do. And you'll find out why those 6 steps are important. But what did I do when I read the book? Immediately, I realized the guy went to the Himalayan mountains. What's really interesting about the Himalayan mountains is you see India's right here. The equator runs right through here. Notice that the equator bisects that country. The other thing that I knew about the Himalayan mountains, they're really high up, you know, like 25 to 30,000 feet. And one of the things that I realized immediately is that that would change the light frequency of what that person would get. And it turns out, for every 1,000 feet you go up, you get more UV light. And then I remembered in the book, he said, yeah, he was tan. So that meant he had to have a lot more UVA light, because UVA light tans. You know, I did learn something in medical school from dermatologists. But the other key thing that I started to notice is I remember in medical school learning about how haplotypes in mitochondria vary by geography and also by latitude. So this is...
So what he's talking about is all of us in our cells have something called the mitochondria. I talked a little bit about this last night. That's probably the one thing to learn about. And this name, Doug Wallace, I highly recommend you Google his stuff. So if you look at medicine, we only explain 20% of the medical things by looking at anatomy. You know, like if you have a headache, it's probably your brain. If you have a chest pain, it's probably your heart. Versus genetics. And we think that's all it, but that only explains 20%. What explains the other 80% is the energetics. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, is like what energy should you be on. So the mitochondria is where we make our energy, and it all has to do with how healthy the mitochondria is to make energy. And interestingly, and this is what this guy's probably going to win the Nobel Prize next year for, is that he realized you get your mitochondria, it's maternally inherited. You get it from your mother. It kind of doesn't matter where your dad's from. It's really your mother. And so wherever she's from in her ancestry, that's probably what he's talking about, your haplotype, and that's probably how much sunlight you should be on. So when you do these ancestry.com type of things, it's really good to know where your maternal lineage is from, and that's probably the kind of environment you should be in.
The key, this is where the cradle of life is right here. Why is this important for everybody in the room to understand? Because people that live in the East Africa Red Zone, the original humans, they have an L0 haplotype. What does that mean? That means they do not uncouple their mitochondria. Why is that? They need all their energy to run away from lions, okay? People that live up here, which is most of us in the room, why? Because we come from Northern European haplotypes, we uncouple our mitochondria. What does that mean? That means we don't use food electrons to make energy, to make ATP. We use it to make heat. Why? Because there's no lions up here. You don't have to worry about lions. You have to worry about freezing your ass off. Okay? So you release heat
See his
from your
glasses?
mitochondria.
This is where I get
And
it.
that does something specific to water that's sitting around your mitochondria. And what is that? It's something that's very counterintuitive. Warm shrinks water. Cold expands it.
We'll talk about this
Well,
next.
why is that important to a mitochondria? Well, it goes back to this story right here. And if you look, most of us have these haplotypes right up here.
This picture is where, if man started from the East African Rift, which is kind of up in here, and then it spreads out, and you can look at this genetically, how it goes. This is sort of explains what